Hey everybody, NecroVMX here, and over the next 10 days, I'm going to be counting down my top 10 RPGs. Now, before we get to the actual list, there's a few things I wanted to clear up. The first is that I decided to follow a one game per series rule. That's not to say that I'll be using one game to represent an entire series. Each game stands on its own on this list, but I didn't want the list to be filled up with games from the same series, or it would be like NecroVMX's top 10 Dragon Quest games and a few other games. That being said, keep that in mind. In some cases, I had to make difficult choices not to include an amazing game because there was another in the series that I liked more. So that being said, my list is not my true top 10 RPGs list, as there are games that I didn't include because of this rule. But I think this is better for you guys. The second thing I want to talk about is the genre itself. Too many times have I seen arguments about whether or not a game or a series is an RPG or not, as everyone seems to have their own definition of RPG. Is Zelda an RPG? How about Castlevania? People argue this back and forth, and I don't really want to do that, so I'm not going to. I'm not going to be entertaining any "this is not an RPG" debate. So right here, I'm going to lay down my criteria for what is an RPG. My definition is much looser than most people's. I don't feel that a game has to have turn-based battles to be an RPG. Personally, I have 6 tenets for RPGs. The first 3 I consider to be absolutely essential. The other 3 I consider to be non-essential. The first tenet is the game should have some level of personal freedom or non-linearity. RPGs are about exploration and finding things out for yourself. While many RPGs are lines of fetch quests with linear storytelling, you always have the option to wander around and discover things on your own. There's some exceptions, like Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which allows virtually no freedom, but that's kind of a crappy game, and that's the main reason why it's a crappy game. The second essential tenet is character growth. Your character, or characters, should grow and become more powerful as you play the game, based on the experiences they have, whether it's gaining an item or a more powerful weapon in reward for solving a puzzle or defeating an enemy, or the tried and true method of experience points. The third essential tenet is an emphasis on storytelling. RPGs, by their purest nature, are interactive stories, where you play the role of the main character, hence role-playing. While it's true that in any game you're playing a role, and many action titles these days do have strong storytelling, the story is usually non-essential to the gameplay experience. In an RPG, not only is the story usually essential to the experience, it usually makes up the bulk of the experience. The first non-essential tenet is a fantasy or science fiction setting. There have certainly been RPGs with more realistic settings like Fallout, so it's not necessary, but it is usually the case. The second non-essential tenet is that your gameplay experience should differ drastically based on choices you make. This mainly refers to non-Japanese games or newer RPGs, as they more commonly allow you to make choices that impact the game to a great deal, coming closer to the traditional RPGs that you played with a pen and paper. This, I feel, is non-essential, as sometimes the game's story just can't be adaptable. The last non-essential tenet is that the main character is a theoretical blank. Usually you name your character, and sometimes you even design them, and they don't usually speak lines in the game. This is not just a quirky, effective design, but an attempt to let you use your imagination. You play the main characters, so they're you, and if they have a set personality, I think it takes away from the player's ability to imagine themselves as the protagonist. That being said, there have been some great RPGs where the main character speaks in dialogue and has a defined personality, so I consider it to be a non-essential tenet. The criteria for what is and isn't an RPG for me remains loose. For example, it's easy to paint the Castlevania games, at least the newer ones, as RPGs. Although the series started off as an arcade-style action platformer, it has evolved into a fully fledged RPG experience. But what about the Metroid series, which Castlevania draws much of its inspiration from? A game like Metroid Prime 3 Corruption meets all of my standards. It's non-linear and all about exploration. You grow stronger throughout the game. There's a strong emphasis on story. It's science fiction. The main character doesn't speak. and you can play it several different ways. So what stops me from painting Metroid as an RPG? It's not a clearly defined line, and for the purposes of avoiding needless and pointless arguing, I've not included that series in my list, but I hope that I've given you something to think about when it comes to defining an RPG. Anyway, enough of this. It's time to get to the actual list. Hope you enjoy it, and like always, I'm sure many of you are going to disagree with me, and I'll tell you right off the bat the same thing I said in my top 10 series list. I don't care. Don't tell me what should be on my list, because it's my list, not yours, and it's meant to reflect my own choices and opinions. So if you think it should be drastically different, don't feel the need to tell me about it, because I really don't care. Lastly, I do hope that you try out these games, as each and every one of them is a masterpiece in its own right. Well, enjoy it. NacroVMX out.